So last time I made one of these little videos, what I wanted to talk about was a little bit about scale and extrapolating. And I dove into a couple of things with a specific context of talking to people online and how I found that there were often a great deal of problems associated with comparisons. I didn't get a chance to talk about scale too much other than a couple of scale problems, so I thought I would take another couple of minutes to talk about scale. Now, let me just say I've spent most of my adult life studying and practicing, I guess what you would call interdisciplinary studies. In fact, what I'm really interested in is how interdisciplinariness is something that you can practice, should practice, and how somebody might go and foster interdisciplinary thinking, interdisciplinary studies, interdisciplinary behavior, and how to practically implement all sorts of planning and policy development from an interdisciplinary perspective. And I guess it's just really a fancy way of saying when you go about doing something, it's all well and good to become really informed on a subject. But if you don't look at some subjects that happen to be closely linked or impact a particular subject, then all of your planning is really not very good because you kind of ignore the entire context in. And so I talk about scale a lot with people because it's important. And here's the example that I often use with people. If you technologically get online and you go look at a Google map or something to that effect, you know how you can zoom in and you can look at the license plate numbers on somebody's car, and you can zoom out, you can see an entire continent. Well, critical thinking skills are greatly improved when you are trained to and begin to practice being able to zoom out to what I like to call the 35,000 foot elevation instead of constantly being immersed in one's own interpersonal experience. If I was going to throw a cliche in there, last time it was apples and oranges, this time it was forest for the trees. In the interdisciplinary world, which is the real world, because no one thing actually exists in isolation. We kind of all live here and act here together. You begin to develop a real appreciation for the degree of relevance that any one subject has, depending on how you are looking at it and who you are looking at it, or who is looking at it. Now, I'm particularly interested in the intersection of some very broad categories of subjects like gender and power and fallout between these large subjects like gender and power. Now you can talk about all sorts of lower level or more personal detail examples of this. And this is where people get really agitated because they want to draw on personal experience, or they find somebody else's personal experience either offensive or they're so empathetic about it that they can't believe that this would happen. And they inform a great deal. But it's much harder to let go of some of and I'm not advocating for letting go of all of, because that's not helpful, but let go of some of the personal, anecdotal stances that inform our behavior and fly up to 35,000 feet and look down at a philosophical or subject landscape, which is in fact a real landscape, but we have to look at the data at that point because that's all we have to look at, and begin to see the forest. And begin to see the forest margins, and begin to see who and what is impacting the forests. Now, of course, I'm just using the forest analogy, but we can talk about other things. And to carry a point home, since I was talking about violence, pornography, and gender, and maleness and femaleness in a manufactured market context, I would like to put before you, whoever happens to be listening or watching this, that a generalization, which I put before people in the online conversation and was lambasted for, is actually an incredibly useful tool. And it's not wrong to create generalizations. Yesterday I said we really kinds of representation because no one person or example can really be representative of a whole unless you're talking about a very automated thing like a pencil. I think that was the example that I gave. But you can and you should learn how to begin to identify broad trends, broad concepts, and groupings, which you have to begin to discuss in terms of a generalization, like men, women, black people, white people, poor people. There's so many examples out there. And that you can't summarily say that generalizations are bad and you can't use them because they don't really work things. Well, you know what? Sorry. They do. Generalizations, in fact, if they're used appropriately in their context and with their descriptive boundaries, actually describe a great deal. And they're very useful in being able to see large interactions. The problem, if you don't know to go from the interpersonal scale to the large scale fairly fluidly and fairly quickly, is that you begin to, in the worldview that you're in, you begin to ignore a great deal about how the world is colored and viewed and operates simply because you are looking at it from your own particular perspective and assuming that everybody else's experience and everybody else's perspective is similar to your own. And unfortunately, that's not true. So part of being an aware person is learning how to step back and out of your own personal worldview, grasp the real world is actually like. And strangely enough, unless you do pay attention, the real world and your own view of it are often not the same. Anyway, have a good one.